The restaurant fell silent as the owner's words hung in the air. "Get out, Trump. Your name's not welcome here." All eyes turned to Barron, a tall, poised teenager in a sleek jacket, his hands casually in his pockets. His composed demeanor contrasted with the tense atmosphere. In the next few minutes, this young man would transform a moment of hostility into an opportunity for change. As the crowd watched, Barron's expression shifted subtly. What unfolded next left everyone, including his harshest critic, speechless, challenging assumptions about privilege, compassion, and the power of a single act. The bustling restaurant hummed with the clinking of cutlery and murmur of conversation. Soft jazz played in the background, creating an atmosphere of refined elegance. Suddenly, a hush fell over the room as the door swung open. Barron Trump stepped inside, his presence immediately commanding attention. Barron's eyes swept across the dining area, taking in the crystal chandeliers and crisp white tablecloths. He had come seeking a moment of normalcy, a chance to enjoy a quiet meal, away from constant scrutiny. But as recognition dawned on faces around him, it became clear that anonymity would not be his companion tonight. The maitre d' froze mid-step, eyes widening as he realized who had entered. Barron noticed the hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face before he approached the podium. "Good evening," Barron said softly, his voice steady despite the tension. "I was hoping to have dinner." "Do you have a table available?" the maitre d' stammered, glancing nervously toward the back. Around the room, diners began to nudge each other, conversations dropping to whispers. Phones appeared discreetly, cameras aimed at Barron. Barron felt the weight of their stares but kept his expression neutral. He had expected some reaction, but the intensity still caught him off guard. All he had wanted was a simple meal, a chance to feel like any other young adult. Suddenly, the kitchen doors swung open. A portly man in an expensive suit emerged, his face a mask of displeasure. The owner strode purposefully towards Barron, eyes narrowed and jaw set. Barron took a deep breath, steeling himself. As the owner drew near, Barron straightened his posture and met the man's gaze steadily. The owner stopped short of Barron, nostrils flaring. "Mr. Trump," he said, voice dripping with disdain, "I'm afraid we don't have any tables available for you tonight." A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. Even those eyeing Barron with suspicion seemed shocked by the blatant hostility. Barron's mind raced, considering his options. He could argue, make a scene, use his family's influence. But as he looked around at the faces watching him, some hostile, some curious, some uncomfortable, he made a different choice. With practiced composure, Barron met the owner's gaze. His voice was calm and clear as he spoke. "I understand," he said, a hint of sadness in his tone. "Thank you for your time." As Barron turned to leave, the weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. The other diners watched, many surprised by the young man's dignified response in the face of such open disrespect. The restaurant owner's voice cut through the tense silence like a knife. "We don't serve your kind here," he spat, his words dripping with venom. Barron, caught off guard by the sudden hostility, blinked once but held his ground. His composure was remarkable for someone so young, facing such blatant discrimination. The owner's face reddened as he continued his tirade, his finger jabbing towards the door with each syllable. "Your family name is not welcome in my establishment. Get out." His body trembled with barely contained rage. Barron's hands remained steady at his sides, his breathing controlled despite the mounting tension. He stood tall, his gaze fixed on the owner, refusing to be intimidated. The young man's silence seemed to infuriate the owner even more. A waiter nearby dropped a fork, the metallic clatter emphasizing the charged atmosphere. Murmurs of dissent began to ripple through the crowd. Your father's policies have hurt people I care about. Why should I show you any kindness? The owner demanded, his voice rising. Barron opened his mouth to speak but was cut off. I don't want to hear your excuses or your empty apologies, the man snarled, taking a step closer. The teenager stood his ground, his expression a mixture of hurt and determination. Barron's gaze shifted momentarily, catching sight of a young family watching. A little girl clutched her mother's arm, her eyes wide with fear. The sight seemed to strengthen Barron's resolve. The confrontation escalated as the owner, frustrated by Barron's silence, grabbed the young man's arm. I said, get out, he shouted. The crowd gasped collectively, shocked by this physical contact. Barron winced but didn't pull away. He looked directly into the owner's eyes, his gaze steady and unwavering. Time seemed to stand still as everyone held their breath. I've worked hard for everything I have, the man continued, his voice breaking. I've built this place from nothing, and I won't have it tainted by association with your family. The raw emotion hinted at a deeper pain fueling his actions. Barron's free hand slowly moved towards the owner's grip. Instead of breaking free, he gently rested it on top of the owner's, causing the man to loosen his grip slightly. The young Trump's expression softened, from determined resistance to empathy. It was clear he was about to speak, to break his silence at last. The entire restaurant leaned forward, eager to hear what this poised young man would say in the face of such hostility. The restaurant held its collective breath, waiting for Barron's response. A ripple of movement spread through the crowd, transforming what began as a confrontation between two individuals into something larger. The air crackled with tension as diners rose from their seats, phones now openly recording the unfolding drama. A diverse array of reactions swept through the room. A middle-aged woman stood, her voice steady. This isn't right. We can't stand by and watch this happen. Nearby, a group of young professionals formed a protective semicircle around Barron. Their leader, a woman in a crisp suit, stepped forward. This ends now, she declared, addressing the owner. You don't speak for all of us. An older gentleman, his napkin still tucked into his collar, pushed back his chair. He walked slowly towards Barron and the owner. I've seen enough division in my lifetime, he said, his voice gravelly with emotion. This young man has shown more grace than I've seen in years. From the kitchen, faces peered out. A young sous chef whispered urgently to her colleagues, her knuckles white as she gripped the doorframe. The sommelier, a bottle still cradled in his arms, stepped out. Monsieur, he addressed the owner, this is not who we are. This is not what our establishment stands for. A couple near the window stood up. One woman spoke, her voice trembling but resolute. If this is how you treat paying customers based on their family name, we'll take our business elsewhere. Her partner nodded, placing a supportive hand on her back. A lone diner who had been quietly observing finally spoke up. I didn't vote for his father, but that doesn't mean we abandon our humanity. Look at how this young man has conducted himself. If that doesn't earn our respect, what does? Barron caught sight of himself in a mirrored pillar. For a moment, his composed exterior cracked, revealing a flicker of vulnerability. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as he turned back to face the owner. A little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mommy, why is that man being so mean to the boy? The child's question hung in the air, forcing everyone to confront the situation through unclouded eyes. As if awakening from a stunned silence, more diners stirred. Some approached Barron, offering words of support or standing nearby in solidarity. Others turned to the owner, their expressions a mix of disappointment and anger. The line between bystander and participant blurred as the restaurant's patrons found their voices, each reaction revealing far more than just the outcome of this confrontation. They were unveiling the very soul of their community. Barron took a deep breath, centering himself. The tension in the restaurant hung thick, every eye fixed on him. With care, he gently removed the owner's hand from his arm, his touch conveying dignity beyond his years. The room held its breath, waiting. Barron's gaze swept across the faces, taking in the mix of emotions. His eyes held a clarity that commanded attention without demanding it. "Sir," Barron began, his voice resonant, "I understand your anger. I've seen how deeply politics can divide us." The owner's face softened from indignation to confusion. Barron continued thoughtfully, "I'm not here to defend or apologize for my father's policies. I'm just trying to find my own way. But it's in moments like these that we can bridge divides." The restaurant fell silent, attention rapt. Barron's words transformed the atmosphere from hostility to reflection. "You mentioned my father's actions hurt people you care about," Barron said empathetically. "I'm truly sorry for that pain. No policy should make someone feel less than human, but healing starts with small acts of kindness, even when it's difficult." The owner's aggression drained as he listened. Barron's response had caught him off guard, forcing him to see the young man as an individual. "I don't ask for forgiveness," Barron said, his voice strengthening. "But I ask that we see each other as people first. Not as labels, but as human beings navigating a complex world." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The sommelier nodded approvingly, admiration replacing shame. "We all have the power to choose how we treat each other," Barron continued. "Every interaction is an opportunity to build bridges instead of walls, to listen instead of shout, to understand instead of condemn." Then, Barron extended his hand to the owner. "I may not change your mind about my family," he said softly, "but perhaps we can change the tone of this conversation. Will you join me?" The owner stared at the outstretched hand, conflict in his eyes. The restaurant held its breath, waiting to see how this pivotal moment would unfold. It felt as if more than just a personal interaction hung in the balance. It was a microcosm of larger societal divisions, with potential for healing or further fracture. The air in the restaurant crackled with possibility. Would the owner grasp Barron's hand, or would pride win out? In that breathless moment, an unexpected gesture was about to change everything. The owner's hand trembled as he stared at Barron's outstretched palm. His fingers twitched, caught between conflicting impulses. The hard lines of anger on his face began to soften, replaced by confusion and shame. His eyes darted between Barron's hand and the watching diners, visibly wrestling with his emotions. Around the restaurant, the atmosphere shifted. An elderly couple exchanged tearful glances. A businessman set down his fork, looking thoughtful. At a corner table, friends whispered intently. A small figure detached itself from the crowd. The little girl who had spoken earlier approached Barron, clutching a crayon drawing. Barron knelt down, his face softening into a gentle smile as he accepted the gift. "Thank you," he said softly. "It's beautiful." The drawing showed a large figure surrounded by smaller ones of various hues, its simplicity resonating through the room. The owner, watching the interaction, seemed to deflate entirely. His gaze moved from the drawing to Barron's face, then to his diverse patrons. Something shifted in his expression, as if seeing his restaurant through new eyes. The maitre d' stepped forward, relaxed and welcoming. "Mr. Trump," he said respectfully, "if you would still like to dine with us, I would be honored to offer you our best table." Barron turned, the drawing still in his hands. His gaze swept across the restaurant, meeting eyes now filled with admiration and humility. The owner found his voice at last. "Please," he whispered, "stay." The invitation carried the weight of an apology and a plea for forgiveness. Barron's response was measured. "Thank you," he said to both men. "I appreciate your hospitality." He paused, looking from the drawing to the faces around him. "I think we've all learned something important here today." Barron's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. But he wasn't finished yet. From his pocket, he produced something that would transform this moment of reconciliation into a catalyst for lasting change. The room held its breath, watching as Barron turned to face the owner, who now stood with his head bowed in shame. With deliberate movements, Barron reached into his jacket pocket. The onlookers leaned forward, curiosity etched on their faces. Barron withdrew a simple, unassuming business card. The owner's eyes widened in surprise as Barron held it out to him. "This," Barron said, his voice clear and steady, "is the contact information for a local charity I volunteer with. They bring diverse communities together, breaking down barriers that divide us." The owner's hand trembled as he accepted the card, his eyes scanning the text. Barron continued, his tone warm and inviting. "Join me next week at one of their events. We'll work side by side, seeing beyond stereotypes and labels." As the owner listened, tears welled in his eyes. His face transformed, from anger to shame, then to a glimmer of understanding. He clutched the card tightly, like a drowning man grasping a lifeline. Barron's gaze swept across the restaurant, taking in the faces of the other patrons. "We all have a choice in how we respond to adversity," he said. "It's easy to meet hostility with hostility, but the path that truly changes things is choosing understanding and compassion." The room was silent, every ear attuned to Barron's words. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to listen. Barron continued, "Change starts with small gestures, with reaching out across the divide even when it's difficult." He paused, his eyes meeting those of the little girl who had given him the drawing earlier. She smiled shyly, and Barron's expression softened. "In that spirit," he said, addressing the entire restaurant, "I'd like to do something I hope will ripple outward." Barron announced he would cover everyone's meals that night with one request. "Pay it forward. Bridge a gap in your own life. Reach out to someone you disagree with. Volunteer in a community different from your own. Listen to a perspective that challenges your beliefs." The impact was immediate and profound. The owner, still clutching the charity's card, stepped forward. His voice, thick with emotion, he addressed Barron and the entire restaurant. "You've shown me a kindness I didn't deserve. I'll be there next week. And I'd like to match your gesture. These meals are on the house. Please, use what you would have spent to support the charity or another cause close to your heart." As the last echoes of applause faded, the restaurant hummed with newfound energy. Barron settled into a seat, composed amid the buzzing excitement. Diners approached his table, eager to share their thoughts and gratitude. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes placed a gentle hand on Barron's shoulder. "Young man, what you did tonight, it's given me hope. In a world that seems so divided, you've shown us what true strength looks like." College students gathered around, their backpacks still slung over chairs. One with curly hair spoke up. "That was epic. You schooled us on handling conflict." The owner approached with hesitant steps, his hands trembling slightly. "I owe you an apology," he began, voice cracking. "What I did was unforgivable. I let my anger and prejudice blind me. You've shown me a better way." Barron listened patiently, his expression softening. "Why don't you join me for dinner?" he offered warmly. "I'd love to hear more about your experiences." As they talked, the owner shared stories of his past and the prejudices he'd held. Barron spoke of his own encounters with discrimination and how they shaped his approach to conflict. Their conversation sparked something in the other diners, igniting open, honest dialogue throughout the restaurant. An elderly couple shared their story of overcoming racial prejudice decades ago. "It wasn't easy," the woman explained, "but we learned that love is stronger than hate." A young woman with vibrant blue hair stood up. "I've been judged for how I look," she said, gesturing to her tattoos. But tonight I've realized I've been guilty of judging others too. I'm going to start seeing people for who they are inside. As the evening progressed, the restaurant transformed. People who entered as strangers exchanged contact information, promising to continue these important conversations. A group of young professionals approached Barron, inviting him to speak at a diversity seminar. Barron considered the offer, reflecting on the night's events. He realized that his actions had rippled far beyond this single evening. "I'd be honored," he replied, "but only if we include voices from all sides. Real change happens when we listen to each other." As the night drew to a close, Barron watched the warmth and understanding that had blossomed around him. The restaurant buzzed with the energy of new connections and shifted perspectives, a microcosm of what could be possible on a larger scale. As the night drew to a close, the restaurant buzzed with newfound energy. Barron's actions had sparked a profound ripple effect. In the days that followed, his response to hatred became a case study in leadership seminars. The restaurant owner, moved by the stories of those he once considered adversaries, partnered with Barron to launch an initiative bringing diverse voices to the table. Their unlikely alliance became a symbol of reconciliation. As Barron reflected on the experience, he found himself drawn to a path of public service, determined to continue bridging divides in an increasingly polarized society.